The siren wailed like a scream tearing the night apart. But what really pierced deeper was not the sound, it was the silence that followed when they saw who stepped out of the ambulance. Some of them laughed nervously, others turned their faces away, as if his very presence was an insult to their pain. He stood there, clutching the medical kit, his name badge gleaming under the golden hospital light, Dr. Elijah Carter. And yet, in their eyes, he was not a doctor who was only a black man daring to cross a forbidden line. Dr. Carter had lived through insults before. He had heard the whispers in corridors, felt the hesitation in handshakes, the quiet dismissal of his authority. But nothing prepared him for this moment. A patient on the edge of death, a family desperate for salvation, and all eyes turning not toward his skills, but toward the color of his skin. His chest tightened as a woman's trembling voice broke the air. "We don't want him." Not him. Someone else. The irony was unbearable. For years, he had trained to be the man who could hold life in his hands, who could look at chaos and carve order out of it, who could see suffering and answer with knowledge and compassion. Yet tonight, none of that mattered. His medical degree, his years of sacrifice, the endless nights of study, all erased by the shade of his skin. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself not to respond with anger. Because anger would make him exactly what they already believed he was: dangerous, threatening, less than human. He had promised himself long ago that he would never let hatred dictate his actions. But standing there, hearing the words of rejection spilling like poison into the sterile air, he wondered if the oath he had sworn to heal would ever be enough to protect him from the world's blindness. The patient groaned, his breath shallow, eyes rolling back. Dr. Carter moved forward instinctively, kneeling beside him, his hands swift and sure. But before he could even open his kit, a hand grabbed his shoulder and pulled him back. It was the patient's brother, eyes wild, face flushed with panic and disgust. "I said not you. I'd rather he die than have you touch him." The words slammed into him harder than any physical blow. For a fleeting second, he considered walking away, let them bear the consequences of their prejudice. But his gaze fell on the patient's face, pale and fading, and something inside him whispered louder than the insults around him. "This man's life matters, even if his family does not believe yours does." Dr. Carter straightened his back, his voice calm but firm. "I am the doctor on duty. If you want him to live, let me do my job." His words echoed in the corridor, defying the suffocating silence. Yet still, the brother's grip tightened, fueled not by reason, but by generations of hate passed down like a curse. The hallway lights flickered, casting a golden hue across the scene, a surreal reminder of how fragile the line between life and death could be. Nurses lingered nearby, torn between duty and fear of confrontation. No one moved, no one spoke. The entire weight of the moment pressed on Elijah's chest. He remembered his father's voice, deep and unwavering, echoing from years ago. "Son, the world will try to strip you of your worth before you even open your mouth. But you must never forget you were born worthy. You don't need their permission to prove it." The memory steadied him. He looked again at the patient gasping for air, then at the terrified, hateful eyes surrounding him. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt down once more, breaking free of the man's grip. His hands hovered over the patient, firm and decisive. "This isn't about you. It's about him. And I will not let him die because of your blindness." For the first time, the crowd fell silent. Even the brother's fury seemed to falter, shaken by the sheer audacity of his resolve. Elijah opened his kit, pulling out the tools of his craft, his hands moving with practiced precision. Each motion was a declaration, each breath a refusal to yield. But deep inside, he knew the fight was only beginning. Because prejudice did not end with a single act of Kuragite lingered. It spread, it demanded proof again and again, as if his humanity needed to be earned each time he saved a life. And yet, as he worked, a quiet truth was forming in the golden light of that hospital corridor. A truth that would soon rise to the surface, unstoppable and undeniable. A truth that would shatter their ignorance and force them to face the man they had tried so desperately not to see. The patient's pulse was weak, fluttering like a candle in the wind. Elijah pressed his stethoscope to the man's chest, blocking out the muttering voices around him. His world narrowed to the rhythm of failing breath and the fragile beat beneath his palm. He had seconds, maybe less. His voice cut through the tension, sharp and commanding. I need epinephrine. Now. No one moved. Nurses shifted uncomfortably, caught between fear of defying the family and the knowledge of their duty. Elijah raised his eyes, steady and unwavering. Do you want him to live or not? That question hung in the air like a blade. Finally, one young nurse broke the paralysis, rushing to his side with the syringe. Her hands trembled as she passed it to him. But in that gesture, Elijah felt the smallest spark of solidarity, a reminder that not everyone bowed to prejudice. He injected the drug, his hands moving with certainty. The patient convulsed, then stilled, and for a breathless moment the room felt frozen. Elijah counted silently 1, 2, 3, and then came the faint rise of the chest, the stubborn return of life. Relief surged through him, but before he could draw another breath, a hand shoved him violently. The brother, face twisted with rage, hissed, "You think saving him makes you one of us? You'll never be." The shove sent Elijah stumbling back against the wall, his kit crashing to the floor. Gasps erupted around them, but no one stepped forward. Prejudice had paralyzed them all. Elijah straightened slowly, every muscle taut with restraint. His father's words echoed again, steadying him, but his heart burned. He wanted to shout, to demand why his life, his worth, his years of sacrifice meant nothing. Instead, he steadied his voice, quieter than before, but sharper than steel. I didn't save him to prove anything to you. I saved him because that's what a doctor does. For a flicker of a moment, the brother faltered. The hatred in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something Elijah couldn't quite name: fear, perhaps, or shame too heavy to admit. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, buried under the armor of inherited hate. The patient stirred, groaning weakly, his eyelids fluttering open. Relief washed over the room, yet no gratitude touched their faces. They looked at Elijah not as savior, but as an intruder who had forced himself into a sacred space. He knew this look well. It was the look of people who would rather deny a miracle than accept it from the wrong hands. But beneath the tension, whispers began to ripple. A nurse leaned toward another, murmuring Elijah's name with something close to recognition. And then, like a spark catching dry grass, the rumor spread. Some eyes widened in disbelief, others narrowed in confusion. Elijah felt it before he heard its shift in the air, the sudden weight of curiosity pressing against him. One voice finally dared to ask, trembling with uncertainty, "Wait, aren't you the Carter family's son?" The word struck like thunder. Elijah froze, the name reverberating inside him. The Carter family. It was a name heavy with legacy, power, and an influence that reached far beyond the walls of this hospital. His family name had been both shield and curse, a truth he carried silently, refusing to use it as a weapon. But now, against his will, it was breaking through. Murmurs grew louder, tangled with disbelief. It can't be. No, he left years ago. But look at him, has his father's eyes. Elijah's stomach twisted. He had spent his life trying to build his identity not on privilege, but on merit, not on a name, but on the oath he swore. Yet here it was, dragging him into the light he had avoided. The brother stiffened, confusion flashing across his face. Carter? As in, Senator Carter. His voice trembled for the first time, the venom faltering. The realization began to unravel him, as if the foundation of his hate was crumbling beneath his feet. Elijah's jaw tightened. He had never wanted his lineage to define him, never wanted to lean on the reputation of his father, a man whose political power was undeniable, but whose private life had been marked by silence and shadows. Still, the truth was undeniable. Elijah Carter was not just a black doctor, was the estranged son of the very man many in this city bowed to. The golden light flickered again, casting his face in sharp relief. Suddenly, every eye in the corridor carried a different weight. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with envy, others with the awkwardness of guilt. The same man they had dismissed moments ago was now tethered to power they could not ignore. Elijah hated it. The irony seared him. Was still the same man, the same doctor, the same hands that had just saved a life. But now, because of a name, they would reconsider. Because of blood, not ability, he was suddenly more than what they had decided he was. His throat tightened, a storm rising within him. He wanted to scream at them all. Why did it take this revelation for them to see him? Why was his worth measured by the shadows of legacy and not by the light of his deeds? The patient's brother, pale now, stumbled over his words. I didn't know. If I had known, his voice cracked. Elijah's glare cut him off. If you had known what? That my father is powerful? That I have a name you fear to cross? Would that have made my hands more capable, my heart more human? His voice trembled with restrained fury. You let hate blind you so much that you would rather see your brother die than let me save him. And now you want to rewrite that because of a name. The silence that followed was heavier than any before. Shame seeped into the walls, though no one dared to speak it aloud. Elijah bent down, gently adjusting the oxygen mask on the patient, his movements calm, deliberate. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. Yet inside, his soul ached. He was tired of fighting for the right to simply exist, tired of proving himself again and again in a world that never stopped questioning. And still, beneath that exhaustion, a fire burned. Because he knew this was not just about him. It was about every child who would grow up hearing they were less, every student who would be doubted before they spoke, every soul forced to carry the weight of prejudice on their back. As he rose, he met the brother's eyes one last time. Remember this moment. Remember what nearly happened because you chose hate over humanity. And pray your brother never learns how close he came to dying not from illness, but from ignorance. The corridor remained silent as Elijah walked away, the golden light trailing after him like a quiet witness. Yet he knew this was not the end. The truth of his identity had been unleashed, and with it, the storm was only beginning. Because some truths could not be buried, and some battles refused to stay silent. Elijah's footsteps echoed down the corridor, steady but heavy, as if each step carried the weight of generations pressing down on his shoulders. The whispers followed him like shadows, rippling from nurse to orderly, from family member to stranger. His name Carter hung in the air like a flare, impossible to ignore, impossible to forget. He wanted to disappear into the quiet of the on-call room, to shut out the eyes that suddenly burned with curiosity instead of contempt. But he knew there would be no escape. Not tonight. The door swung open behind him, hurried footsteps chasing after him. It was the young nurse who had handed him the syringe earlier. Her voice was low, urgent. Dr. Carter, you should know, word is spreading fast. They're already calling upstairs. Administration. They'll want answers. He nodded without turning. Of course, they would. Not because he had saved a man's life, but because the truth of his lineage was now tangled with the prejudice that had exploded in the corridor. Politics had a way of seeping into medicine, poisoning it with questions of image, legacy, and control. Elijah. The sound of his name spoken without the title stopped him cold. He hadn't heard it spoken like that in years, not since he'd left the family estate behind. He turned slowly. Standing at the far end of the hall, framed in the golden light, was a man whose presence silenced even the whispers. Senator Richard Carter. The hospital seemed to shrink in his presence, every corner filling with the authority of a man who had built his life on commanding rooms. Tall, silver-haired, dressed immaculately despite the late hour, the senator carried himself like a man who had never been denied anything. Except, perhaps, his son. For a moment, father and son stood locked in silence, the distance between them more than physical. It was a chasm carved by years of estrangement, by choices made and words never spoken. Elijah's chest tightened. The sight of his father dredging up memories he had buried long ago, memories of a home where love was conditional, where silence about race was louder than any declaration. You shouldn't be here, Elijah said, his voice low, hard. This isn't your arena. Richard's eyes, cold and calculating, softened almost imperceptibly. When my son's name is being dragged through this hospital like wildfire, it becomes my arena. A bitter laugh escaped Elijah before he could stop it. Dragged? You mean spoken aloud? The truth isn't a scandal, father. It's just inconvenient for you. Murmurs stirred again. Staff lingered at a distance, caught between duty and curiosity. They knew they were watching more than a medical drama unfold. They were witnessing a fracture in one of the most powerful families in the city. Richard took a step closer, his voice lowering, but carrying enough weight for those nearby to hear. You think I don't know what you've endured? You think I don't care? But you have to understand, Elijah power demands sacrifice. Our family name, our influence seat can't survive scandal. Elijah's jaw clenched. Scandal. Is that what I am? A scandal you tried to bury? The senator flinched, just slightly, but his composure held. You chose to walk away. I chose, Elijah said sharply, to live as a man, not as your pawn. I chose medicine because I wanted to heal, not to wield your power like a weapon. But even in this white coat, even with these hands saving lives, I can't escape what you tried to silence. I am black, Father. That is not a stain, not a shame to be hidden. The words rang out, fierce and unyielding. The corridor seemed to lean closer, the golden light brightening as if to bear witness. Richard's lips parted, then closed again. He had faced presidents, adversaries, and reporters, but never this. Never the raw, unfiltered truth of a son he had tried to mold into something else. His silence spoke louder than words, and in that silence Elijah felt the full weight of years lost to denial. A weak cough broke the tension. The patient, the man who had nearly died, was being wheeled past on a stretcher, his eyes half open, confused. His brother followed closely, his face pale and drawn, avoiding Elijah's gaze. For the first time, he looked small, the certainty of his hate fractured by the revelation of who Elijah truly was. Elijah stepped aside, watching them pass. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Because this was not victory, this was only exposure. Hatred had been paused, not destroyed, and he knew too well it would rise again in other corridors, in other faces, in other nights. Richard spoke again, quieter now, almost pleading. Come back, Elijah. The world sees you differently now. With your name, your skill, you could change everything. Together, we could. Elijah cut him off with a raised hand. His voice was steady, but beneath it trembled the storm he had carried for years. No, Father. I don't want to be seen differently because of you. I want to be seen as who I am. A doctor. A man. Someone who matters not because of blood, but because of humanity. The senator faltered, for once unable to summon the rhetoric that had carried him through decades of power. And in that faltering, Elijah saw the truth. His father's strength had always been built on control, on bending perception. But here, in the golden-lit corridor, that control was broken. Elijah turned away, his heart pounding, his soul raw. He walked toward the end of the hall, each step heavy but resolute. Behind him, whispers swelled again, not of contempt this time, but of awe, confusion, perhaps even respect. Yet he knew it didn't matter. The battle was not about their voices. It was about his own. As he pushed open the doors to the stairwell, the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint hum of the city beyond. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, a faint gold brushing against the darkness. Elijah stood there for a moment, breathing it in, the night's events pressing against his chest like a bruise. And then, quietly, he whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. This is the beginning." The hospital auditorium was never meant to hold so many people, but by the end of the week, it was overflowing. Reporters lined the walls, their cameras flashing. Nurses, doctors, administrators, and even patients filled every seat, the hum of anticipation thick as a storm about to break. At the center of it all stood Dr. Elijah Carter, his posture upright, his white coat stark against the backdrop of golden evening light streaming through high windows. The scandal of that night had spread like wildfire. Whispers of a black doctor denied the chance to heal, of a family's rejection laced with hatred, and of the shocking truth that the doctor was none other than Senator Richard Carter's estranged son. The story was too volatile, too symbolic, to stay buried. And so, the hospital had called this meeting half damage control, half desperate attempt at clarity. Elijah did not want the stage. He had not sought the spotlight or the noise of politics. But silence, he realized, was no longer an option. If he walked away now, he would abandon not just himself, but everyone who lived under the same shadow of prejudice. His heartbeat thundered, but his voice, when it came, was calm. "You all know why we're here," he began, scanning the room. "Some of you were there that night. You saw what happened when a man's life was hanging by a thread, and the question wasn't whether I could save him but whether my skin disqualified me from even trying." The silence was total. He continued, his tone sharp but filled with restrained emotion. "You saw his family refuse my hands, refuse my training, refuse the oath I swore because to them, I was not a doctor. I was just a black man. And in that moment, prejudice nearly killed someone. That is not a misunderstanding. That is not a mistake. That is hatred, and it cannot be excused. Murmurs rippled. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, riveted. Elijah pressed on. I saved him anyway. Not because they wanted me to. Not because they trusted me. But because it was right. Because when someone is dying, you don't ask what color their skin is, you save them. That is what it means to be a doctor. That is what it means to be human. His eyes burned, but he did not blink. And yet, it was only when they learned my last name that their eyes changed. Suddenly, I wasn't just a black Monty with Senator Carter's son. Suddenly, the hate cracked. Suddenly, I was worth something. That is the cruelest irony of all. Because I was always worth something. With or without that name. With or without his blood. My worth should never have been up for debate. A gasp echoed when the senator himself entered the hall, escorted by aides. The crowd shifted, torn between reverence and curiosity. Richard Carter stood tall, his face unreadable, but his presence only sharpened the weight of Elijah's words. Elijah turned to face him directly, his voice ringing louder now. Father, for years you hid me. You told me the world would not understand, that acknowledging me would bring ruin. But the truth is, you were afraid. Afraid not of me, but of the reflection I cast. I was the piece of you that did not fit the image you wanted to sell. And so you buried me. But here I stand. Not your secret. Not your shame. A man who will not be defined by your silence. For once, the senator faltered. His lips parted, his eyes softened, but no words came. Elijah held his gaze, refusing to let the moment slip into ambiguity. You taught me once that power demands sacrifice. But I've learned something else. Justice demands truth. And the truth is this: our system is sick. It treats some lives as fragile glass to be guarded, and others as disposable. It values lineage over humanity. It poisons healing with hatred. That night in the corridor, prejudice nearly took a life. How many more must it claim before we admit that the sickness is not in our patients, it is in us? The golden light streaming through the windows bathed the room, falling across Elijah's face. His voice grew softer, but the softness only deepened its power. I am not asking for applause. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for change. For every doctor, every nurse, every human being to look beyond skin, beyond name, beyond fear, and to see the person in front of them. Because if we cannot do that, then what is the point of healing at all? The room held its breath. For a long, aching moment, silence reigned. And then, slowly, a pair of hands began to clap. A nurse in the back, the same one who had stood with him that night. Others followed, hesitant at first, then with gathering strength. Soon, the entire auditorium roared with applause, not polite, but raw, desperate, as if they too had been waiting for someone to speak the truth aloud. Elijah stood still, the sound washing over him, not as triumph, but as affirmation. He had not spoken for glory, but for necessity. The applause was not for him alone, was for the possibility of a world less poisoned, less blind. Richard Carter did not clap. He stood rigid, torn between pride and shame, power and love. But when his eyes met his son's, something shifted. Perhaps not enough to undo the years, but enough to begin. Elijah stepped down from the stage, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Outside, the sun was setting, the sky painted in deep gold. He walked through the hospital doors, the cool evening air brushing against his face, and for the first time, he felt no need to hide. He was not just a doctor, not just a son, not just a black man. He was all of those, and more. And he had proven, to himself and to the world, that humanity could not be measured by skin or by name. As the golden light bathed the city, Elijah whispered the words he had carried silently for so long. I am enough. I have always been enough. And with that truth, he walked forward not into the shadow of legacy, but into the light of his own making. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.